to this week's Fireside Chat with Jesse. I am joined today by Andy Fishburn, the Vice President of Federal Government Affairs at Equipment Leasing and Finance Association. That's a long title, man.
Yes, it does fit on a business card, but the font is tiny.
That's perfectly fair. I'm like, maybe I should have practiced that before I actually started. But regardless, Andy, it's great to have you on here, man. And thanks again for your time and sitting down with me this week.
Yeah, great to be here. I've looked forward to this. I think this is your 133rd episode, if I haven't lost count. So proud to be part of a long tradition of greatness.
Perfect. No, I'm glad to have you on here, and for the occasion of discussing your background and just having some friendly banter today. I wore my all black, and I have my Moscow Mule cup here, depending on how this conversation goes. So
excellent, love it.
Ready to rock and roll, man.
Love it. Let's do it.
So, Andy, for people that may have not had the pleasure of meeting you yet, can you mind just kind of giving your background and career to date?
Sure. So I went to college at the University of Michigan and did my grad school work at Indiana University. So I'm a Big Ten guy at heart. And coming out of graduate school, I entered into a program that was then called the Presidential Management Internship Program. Now it's called the Presidential Management Fellowship Program. And it's a 2-year program for folks coming out of graduate programs at U.S. universities that is a fast track into U.S. government. And so it's a 2-year program. You do details, you do different assignments. And my first job coming out of graduate school was at the United States Mint. And I was an environmental protection specialist. And people always say, well, why does the U.S. Mint need an environmental protection specialist? And once you explain that it's a large metal manufacturing facility, it starts to become a little bit more clear. And they had some issues with their chromium emissions up at the plant in Philadelphia. And so I went there to help them develop a more robust environmental management system. And through the process, I ended up doing a detail to start covering the congressional affairs portion. Every single coin, whether it be the 50 States Quarters program or a commemorative coin or the dollar coin program, requires legislation. And so they actually have a pretty robust congressional affairs program. And I got into congressional affairs and legislative affairs and really enjoyed it. And it was at a time when the Mint was doing the 50 State Quarters program, the dollar coin program, and it was getting a lot of attention. So it was really a vibrant place to work. From there, I ended up at the Treasury Department's Office of Legislative Affairs, covered everything that the Treasury Department does, from the appropriations that fund the Treasury Department to the domestic finance portfolio, which is critical as far as the regulatory environment goes, but also the actual funding of the U.S. government. So the issuances of bonds, the cutting of checks by the U.S. government to citizens and contractors, and international affairs, tax policy, and also one of the more interesting areas, and a lot of people don't realize the role Treasury plays until they realize that the sanctions programs are out of the Treasury Department. And I ended my tenure at the Treasury Department proper, covering the terrorism and financial intelligence portfolio within the Legislative Affairs Office. So in 2007, a gentleman I've been working with very closely on the terrorism financial intelligence portfolio, he became the director of the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. And I was in his office and asking him what his plans were. And he said, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, but I'm really looking for a chief of staff. And I said, interesting, in my head. And I talked it over with my wife over the weekend, and I went back in on Monday and said, if you're looking for a chief of staff, I'm interested. So I was the chief of staff at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, so the agency that does money laundering and counterterrorist financing, collecting all the information from banks and others about currency transactions over $10,000 and the like. Did that for 2.5 years. Was on the Hill working for Max Baucus on the finance committee. After that, on the tax staff for 1.5 years. I did a quick stint back at the Mint after my time on the finance committee, and learned that it was a different place than the U.S. Mint of 1998 through 2000, and started to say, maybe it's time to try something other than government. And very typical Washington, started talking to some folks, found out that the position at ELFA was open, and talked to some folks, got my name in the mix, and interviewed with Woody Sutton, who, as you know, is 6'6" and a former admiral. So I was a little intimidated at the process, but
Sure.
He actually gave me homework during the interview process, which I thought was really novel. I had to come up with a presentation on how to position the association in tax reform. And part of me was always worried, if I give a really good presentation, they don't need to give me the job. They can just, do that. And but I did get the job, and that was September 2012. I started at ELFA, and it's been a great run, and really happy with my decision. Wouldn't change it for the world.
No, that's a very extensive background. I didn't know about that fellowship program or any of that stuff. And were you in the Mint when the machines were actually running?
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So if you go to the Mint, has 4 production facilities, and then they also manage the U.S. Bullion Depository at Fort Knox. And so they have Philadelphia and Denver is where they produce all the circulating coinage. And then the San Francisco is they do some commemorative coins and a lot of their collectibles. So those proof sets you got, from your grandparents when you were growing up to commemorate an occasion, that's made at the Mint in San Francisco. And then they have the West Point Bullion Depository, which is co-located with the military academy, and they also make bullion coins there. But so you walk into Philadelphia, and they have rows of machines that are stamping out 750 quarters per minute. And it's, I forget the tonnage, I knew it at one point, but several tons of pressure going down onto the coin. But yet it wasn't quiet when I started, but if you go back now, they've made a lot of advances in their safety, and it's actually rather quiet, which is amazing to think that it's punching 750 little pieces of metal a minute, but yet it's pretty quiet. And then there's a big tub, and you can just kind of stick your hands in it and kind of do
Mr. McDuck was
exactly the Scrooge McDuck playing with money. But it's a little heavier than the product of the sister agency is the Bureau of Engraving and Printing. And they make all the currency there. Okay. They have greater dollar denominations, and it's a little easier to play with their stacks of money than the coins, which I think weigh about 50 pounds per bag, and the bag's about the size of a loaf of bread.
That's awesome. That was going to be my next ignorant question I was going to ask. Like, what about the dollar, like the actual cash being printed? Then come to find out, it's different, whole different place.
Yep. But so that's in Washington, D.C. It's a cool tour. Kids love it. And then they also have a facility in Fort Worth. And there's a little note, and next time you or any of your viewers are with me, I can show you the little place on a dollar note that you can tell where it was actually printed.
That's neat. I'm guessing security at these places are probably through the roof. But then again, how can you walk out with a big old bag of frickin' coins?
So what's interesting is the security on the way in is kind of like an airport. It's the security on the way out that's tight. Um,
I mean,
and
I guess.
at the facility in West Point, because they store bullion there and they make bullion coins, they actually take a total metal reading of your body going in, so that they know that the amount of money, the amount of metal in your body going in, is the same as the amount of metal going in your body on the way out. So your fillings count.
That's crazy, but I mean, it makes sense.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
it's boring because there's nothing you can do. You can't even have any fun with that. But whatever.
Nope, nope, it's frowned upon.
Oh, it's awesome. But definitely with that, your experience in government, I could see, I mean, you're doing a great job for the association and definitely have the qualifications now. Working on the money laundering and some of that stuff there, that's really neat. Um, any cool stories you can share on that?
Not really. So the part that is fascinating about the financial intersection of how crimes are prosecuted is that people always presume that it's the money flow that is the important part to capture, and they forget about the value of the intelligence that's associated with the money flow. So it may not be, that this person transferred money to this person. It may be that all of a sudden you realize, oh, this person transferred money to that person. And it's weird because that phone number is associated with this thing that's entirely unrelated to the actual transaction.
Got it.
And so it was really fascinating to see those aspects of it and how the power of being the dominant economy in the world, being the reserve currency for the world, puts the United States in a position where we're able to utilize our economic powers in order to achieve foreign policy goals. And it provides options short of military power that are able to complement our diplomatic efforts on any number of issues, whether it be, Russian oligarchs or North Korea or, the Sudanese or, the Cuba embargo, over a period of time. And it's really impressive when you realize that the power of the U.S. Treasury and the forces they can bring to bear on issues like that.
Nope. Nope. Perfect. I just think of like that, and it's like, oh, some of this money laundering. Was it like a RICO statute? Like I watch a lot of movies, obviously, right? And it's like the
Yeah.
ignorance is bliss thing, and it's like, oh, did you able to overcome and sniff this guy out and go do that?
Yeah, I mean, if you look back in the history of the money laundering rules, it used to be really easy to basically hide your money by using large bags of cash, and then it was large bags
I
of
watched
cash.
Scarface a couple weeks ago. I saw that. I saw that.
Yeah, yeah. And then people got pretty smart. They said, "Oh, the reporting level is $10,000. Well, I'll just deposit my money $9,000 at a time." And now it's illegal to do $9,000 at a time. It's called structuring. And our banking members will tell you that there's no end of regulatory efforts and regulatory work that's associated with the money laundering side. I will note, one of my proud moments at ELFA was I was able to harness my time at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. There was some beneficial ownership rules that were passed by FinCEN, Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. It acronyms down to FinCEN. And there was an exemption for vendor-based finance, but it wasn't totally clear whether it would actually work for the way that ELFA member companies do beneficial ownership. And the way ELFA member companies do vendor finance. And so a lot of bank compliance departments were saying, yeah, it's great. It looks like we were supposed to get an exemption, but it might not have worked. And so we were able to go back to FinCEN and say, hey, can we get some clarification on this vendor-based financing exemption? some clarity would help our members be compliant with your rules. And we were able to get a frequently asked questions. They do a document periodically after they've issued regulations. And we were able to get a question specifically answered on the vendor-based finance that was clear as day that it applied to the traditional way that ELFA member companies do vendor finance. And it was a cross-functional effort, pulled in a bunch of different members. We had flow charts of the way the transactions worked. And it was real. We were the only ones that were working on the issue, and we got it done to the benefit of the ELFA membership. So it was nice to be able to take the money laundering background, which I don't use very often in my ELFA work.
Sure.
But it does inform me on the fraud effort, on the fraud side. And fraud's a big issue that ELFA members like to try to avoid. So does help me there as well.
So 2012 is when you started. Do you remember what your first, I guess, conference was? I mean, was it a Capital Connections, or what was that? And
no,
what was that? What was that experience like with this crew? I guess I'll just say it like that.
So my first, so I joined in September. My first conference was annual convention, and Woody had told me that my job was to finish off what was at that point a draft of a tax policy statement for the association and present it to the board. It'd be 10 minutes, and it would be easygoing. The board would approve it, and we'd move on from there. And so in the next month and a half-ish, I did more dry runs than I've ever done for a presentation. I had it almost down to the word. And we get there, I get about 6 minutes in, and I get to the part about green energy subsidies, and someone kind of raised their hand and said, well, we make a lot of things that aren't so green, and they're mining and construction and agriculture and forestry. And
you lost them at green.
And it wasn't that they were objecting to the alternative energy. It was that they didn't want a tax policy statement that appeared that it was to the harm of the traditional energy sources. And what was supposed to be a 10-minute part of the agenda went on for about 55 minutes. I caused one of the few votes I've ever seen on the ELFA board. And but then, later that evening, we go to the chairman's black tie reception, and everyone is slapping me on the back and saying, sorry, I had to give you such a hard time in there, just doing my job. And it was such a collegial environment that while it was not exactly the way I wanted the presentation to go, it was a really good introduction to the industry where, they fight over deals all day, and then they'll go out and have a cocktail in the evening together. And it's such a great collegial working environment that, but yeah, no, I'll never forget my first ELFA event.
Kind of trial by fire. I could picture Woody doing that. Here you go.
Yep.
And you're still here 11 years later. So
still here.
Yeah. Let's keep the train rolling.
There are a few people who like to remind me of it. And
oh, really?
Yeah, they like to pick at the scab.
Of course. I mean, why not, right? Yeah, you know. That's excellent. So want to get into a few topics here, if you don't mind. Sure. Section 1071. I'm sure people watching this are probably rolling their eyes like, oh God, is this over with yet? Or are we done? And that's one of the questions I want to ask you, Andy. Where are we at with it?
Yeah. So for those of you who have not read a magazine article or a newsletter that I've written over the last 10 years, Section 1071 is part of Dodd-Frank, which was passed in 2010, and is the last major regulatory effort coming out of Dodd-Frank. And the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau issued the regulations implementing Section 1071 earlier this spring. and at the very tail end of March. And what Section 1071 will do is will require commercial finance companies, defined broadly to include independent finance companies, captive finance companies, banks. Basically, if you provide commercial financing, you're a covered entity, to inquire of their customers at the point of loan application, whether their customer is a small business defined as under $5 million of revenue. And then if they are a small business, inquire whether or not the business is minority owned, woman owned, or LGBTQI plus owned. And then there's kind of two paths you follow from there. One is the customer provides the information, the demographic information. And it's not just whether they're owned by a woman or a minority, it's also their ethnicity, broken down into a wide, very granular level of ethnicity. So it's not just Asian, it's Chinese, Vietnamese,
Oh, really?
Thai.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, so if the customer provides that demographic information, then you take the demographic information and you pair it with the financial information associated with the application. So whether it was approved, declined, what the rate that was offered, the annual revenue of the company, the NAICS code of the company, so the North American Industrial Classification Standards code, the census tract of the company, and you bundle all that up and you send it to the CFPB. So you collect for a year, and then you bundle it up every June and send it to the CFPB. That's track one. Track two, if the customer declines to provide the demographic information, you still need to provide the financial information on the loan to the CFPB on that annual basis as well. And this has been a long process. The proposed rule came out a couple of years ago, and ELFA has been heavily involved in this. We've advocated on it directly. It's been an issue for Capital Connections. You've advocated on it when you've come to Washington. And as a result, there's a lot of aspects of the rule that are better than we thought. We thought that the rule, there was the potential that it was going to require the collection of information on non-small businesses. There was the potential that you weren't going to be able to take your customer's word for their annual revenues or their ownership status, that you would have to verify it afterwards. That's not the case. There was a really distinct chance that if you and I were doing a deal right now, and I didn't want my demographic information provided, that you would have to surmise my ethnicity based upon my appearance and or my last name. And I will admit that I'm really happy for the industry that that provision fell to the wayside. Although my slide presentations had a really good presentation with my Google nemesis, who's this beach volleyball player from the 1974, from the 1970s. And so it's made my presentations a little more boring, but it was a big win. Also, leases, as defined by the UCC and commercial law, are exempted. So true leases are not going to be required to be reported on. There's a staged implementation so that companies that do under 2,500 loans per year will get a longer implementation timeframe. That's important. The CFPB gave it's 123 pages of instructions, but they gave the instructions when they issued the final rule. And that was a big concern, was that they'd issued the final rule, but they wouldn't issue the instructions to software providers and the like on how to actually format it and provide it to the CFPB. So our efforts over multiple years, while we didn't make it go away, I've always thought that that wasn't really a possibility. We've had, this was a provision that was pushed by Maxine Waters and Elizabeth Warren, so primarily a Democratic proposal. But we've had times over the last now 13 years since it passed where there's been Republicans in control of both bodies of Congress with a Republican in the White House, and it wasn't repealed. And last Congress, there was actually 33 Republicans who voted to expand portions of it. So the chances of it ever going away, I don't think were ever realistic. It was kind of hopeful. And we're going to keep trying to work at it to make it better for the industry. But as bad as it is, it's important to remember that it's not as bad as it could have been. Although I have a binder here, and this is double-sided, and it's 888 pages of regulatory text. So it is not small, not dense, and unfortunately, it will lead to a lot of. Unfortunately for the ELFA regular member companies, it will lead to a lot of billable hours, which may be to the benefit of the ELFA members who work at the law firms doing those billable hours. But
no, I mean, from what you just said was stripped out of it. I mean, not the end of the world, right? I mean, that was the biggest challenge that I saw in lobbying against it was if someone doesn't tell me, then you're basically making me make that ethnic, based on someone's last name or how I thought they sounded on the phone. It's like, come on, like what's that? So I guess my question is, when people are taking applications over the phone, or if they're doing them online, is this just an optional fill out your ethnicity? Or so what if it's not a recorded conversation? I'm just trying to think of that like enforcement side of it if they're not asking the question.
Yeah, this is an important issue because the CFPB, which is the agency that will enforce this provision, has specifically said they're going to be looking at this issue. So let's say you take the predominance of your applications over the phone, and you end up with 20% of your applications have the demographic information provided. Whereas when the CFPB looks across the universe of finance companies, they see that the average finance company gets about a 40% rate of return on the demographic information. Well, the CFPB is going to have some questions in that case. So you need to have a process that is designed to encourage the provision of the demographic information, but it is voluntary. So they've even gone through to say, if in the rest of your form, it's a drop-down box that needs something selected, well, the demographic information will need to be a drop-down box that you select. I decline to provide this information. It can't just be a hyperlink saying, please go here to fill out some demographic information for the government. That's not going to work. And they're going to be looking at that. And if you think about it, so the majority of, to use a completely different example, the majority of tax audits now are matching audits. So your employer sent in a 1099, sent in a W-2. The amount you listed on your taxes is $100,000 less than what was listed on your W-2. Well, you're going to get audited.
Sure.
What will happen is a lot of this will be automated, such that if a commercial finance company is batting zero on getting demographic information, they're going to know that without ever having a person look at it. And those are the companies that are going to get a lot of attention, especially early on in the process.
Yeah, I mean, because part of the thing that I see, it's like some like independents, right, or even banks, as they take these applications. If all of a sudden you lead off with that, what does it matter to me as a consumer looking for a loan? Why should I tell you that? Are you going to give me a worse deal? Right. But then you have somebody else that's like, no, you put that at the end. because then you're
Yes.
already talking about all their options. So then it's
Yeah.
like, uh,
Yeah, I think the those feedback forms usually end up at the end of the application process. But at the same time, you know, there's a variety of different ways that it can be done, and I'm quite confident that over the next 3 years, all of them will be done by somebody.
and then you said that from a time frame perspective that people under 2,500 have a longer time frame. What about those people over? I guess what are the time frames right now of when this has to be implemented?
Yeah, so if you have over 2,500 covered transactions, so you're a covered institution and you have over $2,500 of loans, not leases, not factoring, not trade credit, which are exempted categories, then you need to start complying in October of 2024.
Okay.
You're going to collect for those 3 months and then you're going to report in June. And then if you have um, between 500 and 2,500, so whatever those numbers, it's probably 500 and 24.99. I gotta say, if you're at 24.99, you might as well just start in October. Um, the Then that's April of 2025. And then
So
if
6 months.
you're under between 100 and 500, then you're January 1st of 2026.
Got it.
And in all
And
those
then
situations, you're going to collect until the end of the calendar year. And then you're going to submit all the information you collected for that calendar year the following June.
following June. And then this is just for origination applications, not for number of active contracts, right?
So the threshold is for origination. So the 2,500 is 2,500 loans originated.
Per annual
Correct.
calendar year.
Per
Okay.
annual, and there's a 2-year test, and it's complicated. And
Okay. Sorry, I wasn't looking to go down a rabbit hole. It was more of just a curiosity.
yeah, and then the small business part, the 5 million, is a pretty complicated test as well. And there's all sorts of different aspects to that. What if it's a special purpose entity that is never going to have any revenue, and or didn't have, or it's a startup that didn't have any revenue last year because it didn't exist.
Sure.
You know, is it a small business? Is it not?
That,
And
that,
but
that's on page 60 on the back of your folder there,
yeah,
or
yeah,
600
exactly.
and
660, they're still on the introduction at that point. Um,
sorry.
but it's the threshold is for 2,500 originations, but you will need to report on every application, regardless of whether it went to origination or not.
Interesting. Okay. So even if it's not approved, it's number of apps in. Got it.
Correct. Yeah. And it gets complicated because in a vendor-based system or a broker-based system or a dealer-based system, you're not seeing the customer at the application stage, but yet you still need that information before you can decision it.
Sure.
They're very clear that the information needs to be collected before the loan is decisioned. And so again, there's a couple different ways you can look at that. And I'm certain that people will look at it different ways, where some people will go back out to the customer before the decision's made, and other people will have their vendors and dealers collect it for them.
Interesting. Also, where if it's like, just get an application just to get an app to see if it works, then it's like, well, maybe not.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, when we say it's going to change commercial finance, and the application process is definitely going to be different. I mean, yeah, if you get to an application and you're just seeing it, you know, seeing what your rate might be on a pizza oven, and all of a sudden you have 26 extra questions at the end, maybe you don't complete the application.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, this is just not worth my time. I mean, I've done that before. It's just like, why?
Yeah, yeah, it's not worth the candle, right?
Nope. Nope. All right. Well, anything else on section 1071 that I might not have asked a question on, or we might not have covered?
No, so I mean, I'm going to be speaking about Section 1071 and writing about Section 1071 at any number of ELFA events over the coming months, but we're just trying to get the word out that it's out there, it's real. There are dates now where ELFA member companies need to be compliant. You need to be wading through the 888 pages. If you're not, you need to tell someone that works for you to go wade through it. If it's if it's advisable, getting some outside counsel or inside counsel advice on how you want to approach the various issues, whether it be having to do with the firewall or how you're going to do your vendor agreements to make sure the information gets collected, and then looking at it once you start collecting, how are you going to check your systems? And these are all the big business decisions that executives need to make now, such that they can be compliant in the timeframes that are laid out by the rule.
Sure, and we have a lot of, being on the consulting side now, we have a lot of ELFA, NEFA member companies are coming to us saying, "Hey, what are the softwares doing to make sure that they're," because a lot of this onus falls on them to make sure that they have the right fields and stuff in the systems to be able to collect this data.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, and do you put it in your own application software, or is there we've all been to websites where you get diverted to a third-party website and then you come back in, and all of those options would be my guess will exist. And the be all end all solution probably depends on your individual setup.
Sure. Well, thanks for covering that. So I guess that's now done, yeah. Right? Done-ish, done.
We're moving on to the next phase.
What are we going to be talking about at Capital Connections this year?
Well, so we think there is the opportunity to maybe improve the situation, and there's legislation out there that pushes out the compliance timeframe for all entities, and we're going to be asking ELFA members to support that. And there's also legislation that will redefine what small business is, so not $5 million a year down to $1 million a year in annual revenue. And $5 million a year basically captures all non-publicly traded companies in the country.
Yeah.
It's $5 million a year in annual revenue is not what most people think of when they think of a small business. Sure. And so getting that down to 1 million would be a big win. And we're going to be encouraging that legislation to be supported as well. But then most importantly is sort of a long-term effort. We're going to be asking, so when you go in to meet with your Arizona members, we're going to be encouraging you to schedule a visit with your member of Congress when you get home. So have them out to your facility, have them do a town hall with the employees, see the footprint that you have in the district, talk about, if for a regular member company, talk about a project that you financed in the district. Members of Congress always know where construction is going on in their district, and if there's new building or a new lighting project or something's going in, or a restaurant's revamping. The member of Congress knows, but what they don't know is that project is oftentimes financed. And I just had the opportunity to go down and visit a member company, Arvest Equipment Finance down in Arkansas. And we had their local congressman out, and it was one of these visits where they're located on a former Army base. And the congressman did some of his training there when he was in the Army. And it was this great visit, and he got to see how many employees are actually in his district doing equipment finance. And it was a great visit, took about an hour. My colleague, Matt Hart, did most of the work on our end. I went down. Fort Smith, Arkansas is right next to Oklahoma. So it's just a little side bonus that I got to pick up my 47th and 48th states.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, no, it was a great trip. And what we're going to be doing is encouraging everyone to do that, because there's going to be a lot of issues coming up in the next few years. Tax reform is a lot of the provisions are expiring in 2025. And as anyone who's in sales knows, the time to build a relationship is not when you need to make the sale. It's you got to build a relationship over time. And so we're going to be encouraging ELFA member companies to start building those relationships with their local members back in the district.
Perfect. And then Arizona is a toss-up all around anyway. So who knows
Yeah,
what's going to be
Arizona's
going on in
gotten
the state.
interesting. I put all my money in Arizona local television markets in even numbered years. It's
kind of crazy, but anyhow,
might have three choices.
Huh? Yeah.
I have three choices.
I don't know. But when you're out here for annual, maybe there's a few introductions that I can have come talk to you.
Yeah, that'd be great. Love it. That's right. We're going to be in your backyard.
Yeah. I'm excited for that. Less time on a plane, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
So I guess we're running a little short on time here. Any new potential legislation? I mean, obviously the states are dealing with these disclosure laws, right? It's more of the state level. Any federal things that are potentially bubbling up that need to be considered by the industry?
Yeah. So I like to think about where the federal and the state laws are going to intersect. And if you're going to have to disclose every June 1st the rate that you charge on every single loan to the federal government, do we really care anymore about state level disclosures? It's sort of, that horse has left the proverbial barn. The issues on the tax front are still very prevalent. There's ELFA members that are still dealing with the interest deductibility. 100% expensing is now 80% expensing. It's going to go down to 60% expensing next year. That's a big factor.
Sure.
And then, it's a 4-letter word here in Washington, but the debt ceiling is a big concern. And just the ability of the U.S. government to kind of do the basics of keeping the trains running on time is not all that proven over the last 10 years. So
it just seems like there's always a debt ceiling. Like there's a debt ceiling crisis, like all the time. It's like, come on.
Yeah. Well, and the bill that was passed, and I think it was a big deal that the Republicans were able to get that through. It's a bigger step than people are making it out to be. But their bill only took it to next year. Next year is an election year. Anybody who thinks it's going to be easier in an election year, I don't tend to give them a lot of credence.
It was probably intentional. They want the drama.
Yeah,
right?
they want to be able to do it again for fun.
Always is a head scratcher. So what makes you tick outside of work? Like, what do you do for fun, Andy?
Yeah. So I have two wonderful girls, and today they got to go, and it was pretty cool. They got to go in for. My wife is an attorney for the U.S. government, and they got to go in for Take Your Kids to Work Day, and they actually argued in front of a judge, and they didn't fight, but they got to present their arguments to a judge, which was really cool. And so I spend a ton of time on soccer fields watching them play. I like to say I'm a full-time Uber driver, part-time equipment finance government relations person, because I spend a fair amount of time driving them around on the weekends. But I like not related to raising children. I love being outside. I've taken up in recent years taken up adult soccer, so that when I'm on the field watching my kids, I can actually realize how hard it is what they're doing. Taken up tennis again.
Not pickleball. Just sticking with tennis, huh?
We have a pickleball set in the garage, and I'm not anti pickleball. I know a lot of tennis players are, but but I just haven't gotten the opportunity to play. I do want to know what the kitchen is. Someone's got to explain that to me. But I don't know whether I'm supposed to be in the kitchen or not in the kitchen. And so James Kress or Eric Gross, if you're interested, if you're listening, fill me in on what the kitchen's all about.
How old are your daughters?
They're 9 and 11.
Okay, yeah.
So
Uber driver for a while.
Middle school.
Yeah, I get to wake up. I get to wake up 5:30 on Saturday morning and drive my son an hour for a baseball tournament. So
wow, how old's your son now?
14.
14. Wow.
Well, I have 14 and 5. Okay. So a little gap there. It's like, you know, you kind of get that. Yeah, being a parent's awesome and having a baby's awesome, you know. And then you're like, well, I have all these additional responsibilities, but you know, we've had some ELFA long timers that have recently had some younger kids. So it's kind of like asking some of those questions when I see them. I'm not going to call them out on here, but
how's it going?
How's it going?
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome, Andy. I really appreciate your time today, man. And look forward to what we got. This will air next week. So then I'll see you probably in 3 weeks.
Yeah, we're getting ready for Capital Connections. We're busy getting all the teams together and getting the webinars scheduled and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, really looking forward to it. And really, thank you for having me on, Jesse. I know I've been asking, when am I going to get a fireside chat? And
I'm sorry. It was not intent. Honestly, it's like when people sit there, it's like my mind runs in a million different ways. So I was glad to have
been on a better topic than Section 1071, but there's no more important one facing the industry right now. So I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me on. You're a great host, and thanks for all you do with this, but then also with the Equipment Finance Cares. I know your work goes very far to improving the lives of many folks. So thank you for all you do there as well.
Thank you, Andy. That means a lot, man. Thank you. And look forward to seeing you here in a couple of weeks, man. Thank you.
All right. Thanks so much.
Have a good day.